guys, and welcome back to our study on apologetics. In this lesson, we're going to continue the portion of our study where we look at other worldviews, beliefs, and religions. And if you remember, last week we looked at New Age philosophy or New Age thought, and we came to a consensus that they have so much that goes into it that they actually stand for nothing. Well, tonight we're going to take a look at atheism. Now, atheism is the worldview that fails to see the purpose or even the existence of God, well, for any God for that matter. The term atheism is derived from the prefix a, which means no or none, and the Greek word theos, which means God. So it means no God. They don't believe in God. Whereas Christians, by comparison, we're theists, who not only enthusiastically believe in a God, but we also submit our lives over to Him. See, Christianity teaches that this God, our God, is personable, knowable, and is intimately involved in matters of the world and intimately involved with each and every one of us. Regardless of that, there are atheists in this world, and when you encounter them, they're usually two different types. The first type includes people who expressively denounce any theistic worldview. They'll aggressively entangle themselves in arguments with theists, us, and try to debunk any statement regarding God. The second type of atheist you'll encounter includes people who don't believe in God, but they lack this belief in God for the same way someone would lack the belief that there's a miniature purple elephant on a boat in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. In other words, they just feel like it doesn't matter. And as I said, atheists love to argue. And most atheist arguments against theism center around two main arguments. The first is the argument based upon the assumption that there's a lack of evidence for the existence of God. The second argument centers upon the perception that God's existence is illogical and it conflicts with the evidence that we do have. I'll give you an example of a typical atheist argument against God's existence. It would go something like this. Well, according to you, God is supposed to be all good and all powerful, right? Well, there's evil and there's suffering that exists in our world. Now, if God were all good, He wouldn't want evil and suffering to exist, would He? And they would continue it like this. If God were all powerful, then He could remove all evil and suffering, right? But because evil and suffering exist, God is either not all good, which means He's not perfect and He's not God, or He's not all powerful. In other words, He's limited in His abilities and His scope. Because either case shows God is not good and all powerful, then God does not exist. Of course, the problem here is that this criticism is a false dichotomy. What I mean by this is there are more than two possibilities. Namely, maybe God has a reason for allowing evil and suffering. Or maybe humanity's freedom requires the allowance of evil and suffering in our lives. As followers of Christ, all of us can agree our hearts break when we see the horrors in our world, when we see these atrocities that are taking place. Even bad things that took place throughout our world's history. Also, the question of evil in this world, it focuses our attention on why God doesn't stop these things from happening. But for many, the question goes much deeper. It doesn't just draw their attention to the question of why does God let these things happen. It actually goes to the point of, does God even exist? See, there's a question of whether atheism is right to say that God isn't real. But we know the truth. We know the answer. God is very real, and God is still in control of our world. Even though we know the answer, and even though we know the truth, atheism is a real belief for some people. So we're going to take a deeper look at this thought so that we may be able to help those that struggle with it. And I'm going to give you some questions to help you out with it. The first question is this: is atheism practical? See, the initial problem with atheism is that it's a negative existential truth claim. Let me explain that term. In other words, we can't claim that there isn't a God unless there's someone who can be in all places throughout the entire universe at the exact same time to verify this claim that there is no God. In other words, if there's not someone that can be at all places at all times throughout the entire universe, there's no way of confirming that whatever someone claims does not exist actually does not exist. Well, many atheists have recognized this issue. And so leading atheists such as Richard Dawkins counter this kind of argument by saying that while they cannot prove a flying spaghetti monster doesn't exist, it's pretty unlikely that it does exist. From the atheistic perspective, the wiser and more rational thought to hold is the one that says that something like this doesn't exist. The question that must be answered here is not whether the existence of God is impossible or even improbable, but rather if there's logical, reasonable evidence that would propel someone to consider that God doesn't exist. In other words, is there anything that gives you a reason to not believe there's a God? I've encountered people that think like this, and some of the questions I've addressed them with are this: are you totally sure that there is no God? If you're not sure, then isn't it possible that there is a God? And if it's possible that a God exists, then can you think of any reason that would keep you from wanting to look at that evidence? You could also ask him, doesn't a world filled with intricately designed species, systems, and processes call for an intelligent designer? Well, if that's the case, then would it be true that if there is evidence for intelligent design, then there's a great possibility of a divine architect behind this design of the universe and everything that's out here? Honestly, guys, many times when you throw questions like that out, it gives them a hard time because they don't know what to say to it. The second question that atheism, or the belief of atheism, needs to address is this: how does atheism account for existence? See, when it comes to existence, the questions don't center on evolution, but they center on how the universe got here. Where did it come from? What is the meaning of life? If there is no God, then what is the purpose of why we're here? See, when we look for the significance or the point of our lives, we're basically asking about the meaning of why we exist. And to really get a grasp on this concept of meaning, in other words, what's the meaning of life, there are other questions that have to be considered. Where did I come from? What's the significance of all that I've been through? What's the significance of my experiences in life? And what is my purpose? What should I be doing? In this case, we have to look at the law of cause and effect. And cause and effect tells us that whatever exists was somehow caused to come into existence. So one must choose between two plausible explanations to account for the cause of the universe. Either an impersonal or a personal cause. It's either a random event or one designed by a divine architect. When you take a look at the impersonal cause, the one where it just happened, there's a few options. First, somehow the universe is responsible for bringing itself into existence. However, this would be greatly illogical because something that doesn't exist doesn't have the ability to bring itself into existence. In other words, if the universe didn't exist, how can it bring itself into existence? It doesn't make sense. Well, some atheists have an answer to this, and they say that the universe has always existed and never had a starting point. But this argument falls short because if the universe always existed, then it would at some point run out of its usable energy. There's a law called the law of thermodynamics that says that would happen. And it seems logical to say that atheism cannot explain how the universe came into existence. On the other hand, a personal cause implies that there was a personal influence, a divine architect, someone that influenced the events that caused the universe to come about. In other words, a stick cannot spontaneously change from a stick to an arrow. Someone has to make it from a stick to an arrow. There has to be something influencing an object, something from the outside, in order for that object to change. See, for the matter and energy that make up the universe to change from its original state to what we have now, there had to be an outside force acting upon it. Whatever or whoever caused the universe to come to existence had to exist before the universe existed. And through scientific methods, we can calculate the age of the universe, which tells us that the universe had a starting point. And we can also prove that matter and energy don't spontaneously change and arrange themselves into something new. So the best conclusion we can reach is that it was an action that was performed by an infinite being that caused the universe to come into existence. It was God. And the third and final question that atheism needs to answer is, how does atheism account for morality? Now guys, it is absolutely possible for someone to be an atheist and be morally upright. In other words, to know right from wrong, to do the right thing in life. However, the issue here isn't whether or not an atheist has the capacity to be moral or not. They absolutely do have that capacity. See, having strong morals or having a strong belief in doing right doesn't equate for having fair morals. Without the absolutes of God, how do people determine what is right and what is wrong? See, some atheistic teaching says that the best moral system is the moral system that brings the most happiness to as many people as possible. The problem with this kind of morality, with this kind of thought, is that there is no moral code. There's no code giver. There's no reason to adhere to any sort of code or law because everyone gets to decide what is good for themselves. What makes me happy? What's good for me? See, this is another area where atheism falls short because it offers a subjective moral system, and this system is based upon human experience, human conditions, culture, human reasons. In other words, wherever I live may determine what makes me happy. And each of these factors has the ability to shift or change. And if the factors change, then the moral fabric changes. And guys, it's impossible to build a strong civilization upon a shifting moral fabric. Whenever the question of morality comes up, atheists may offer the rebuttal that Christian morality is questionable because some Christians have done horrific things to others and each other. In other words, Christians have done bad in life, so how can you have the standard that we need to live by? And this is absolutely true. But the Christian who does horrible things isn't doing them because their faith says to do these things. They're doing them standing opposed to the message they profess that they believe. See, Christianity provides a moral structure, a specific moral set of laws. In addition to the moral structure and these moral laws, Christianity tells us that there's a power greater than us, a power that empowers us daily to do the right and good thing. And as I've said, I've encountered atheists before, and when it comes to this thought, there are some questions I've asked them about it. Is there anything wrong anywhere? And if there is things wrong somewhere, how can we know unless there's a moral code? And if every law needs a lawgiver, doesn't it make sense to say a moral law needs a moral lawgiver? In other words, there has to be somebody that creates this moral thought. The bottom line is this: atheists choose not to believe in God. They just believe there isn't one. And they will throw out everything they can, whether it's moral code or it's evil in the world, whatever it may be, to try to say there is no God. Hopefully in this lesson I've given you some things that will help you when you encounter someone that says they're an atheist. And in the end, they're going to go back to one thing, simply this: if God could allow suffering in the world, then there is no God. Or they're going to say, well, if there is a God, then he's a bad God. He's not a sovereign God. See, and atheists aren't the only ones who question God's authority because of evil in this world. Throughout the Bible, we can see these questions and these statements. However, in Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2, we can read about God creating a world that knew no death, no disease, no destruction. God created this world perfect, where it only knew life and growth. But then there was evil that appeared and spread in the 3rd chapter of Genesis. This is when sin entered into the world through the fall of man. And evil and sin go hand in hand. But guys, fortunately, in the midst of this fallen world, we can turn to God, and we can experience the grace and forgiveness of a life that honors and glorifies Him. But there may be some of you sitting in this group right now, and you have those questions of why is there evil and suffering if God is real? The truth is, we live in a broken world. We live in a world that's full of disease, pain, separation, and evil. But here's the good news. This evil is present, but it's not permanent. See, one day, all the evil, all the suffering will be wiped away. And that's the day that our Lord returns for us. And that new day is going to be full of promise. A promise that there will be no more tears, no more pain, no more suffering, because everything will be made new and perfect through our God. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed this tonight. As you go into your groups, really be honest and open with one another as we look at this thought of atheism. We'll see you next week.